What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, SPMTG. We like that magic stuff, and if you can't tell, we're doing things a little bit differently today because I still don't have air conditioning in my house, so it's literally 92 degrees in my office. So in the interest of not dying of heat stroke, I'm recording this on the laptop in my bedroom where at least I have a ceiling fan. It ain't so bad, I guess. It's pretty terrible, but still. Enough about me. Let's talk about cards. We're, again, in the interest of an expeditious process, we're just going to go in chronological order. You know, the oldest thing spoiled that we haven't covered yet, all the way to the newest thing spoiled that we haven't covered yet. And that means that we have to cover some not amazing cards along the way, but there are some good things that there is some buzz about. Just on this page right here. But we have to start with Taunting Arbor Mage, which doesn't look entirely impressive, but I guess I kind of like it for limited. This is 2 and a green for a 2/3 elf wizard with Kicker 3. When Taunting Arbor Mage enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, all creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. So I like sometimes exactly one lure effect in, you know, your green creature-based limited decks. So this could go pretty well, although it continues a trend of creatures in this set that have like some decent, you know, late game possibilities, mostly kicker creatures, and of course creatures that have to adhere to the party sub-theme in this set. And a lot of those you won't get full value out of until like relatively late in the game, and they're mostly, you know, bad stat lines for too much mana. We see a lot of that in this set, and we've already seen over a third of this set. We've seen like 38% of this set already. So in terms of what we can expect in limited, I think we can with some confidence say that there are going to be a lot of understated, overcosted creatures in this format that are like relatively vanilla a lot of the time. And you're probably going to see a lot of creature-based stalemates and whatnot, people trying to build their party up. A lot of times people probably won't send their creatures into attack if they're trying to stock a full party. So I think that there's a lot of signs that point to sort of board stall-y kind of situations in limited, especially sealed. And those are the exact kind of situations where a card like Taunting Arbor Mage or any other lure effect is going to be really good. So I keep an eye out for this, but I probably wouldn't play more than one. And then again, only in a deck with a ton of creatures in limited. But moving on, Archpriest of Iona. This is just 1 white mana for a human cleric with star 2 power toughness. That star is equal to the number of creatures in your party, so it's always going to be at least a 1/2. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. I want to clear something up. Yesterday, I kind of goofed, even knowing full well what the party mechanics are, you know, just to clear things up and clarify. More than one creature type on the battlefield won't count extra towards a party, right? So in this case, if you have, you know, 3 clerics, then it's not suddenly a 4/2 or whatever, a 3/2. That's not how it works. Each creature type only counts towards the party mechanic 1 time. So I do want to clarify that. I goofed yesterday. I was talking about like Thieves Guild Enforcer turn 1 into the new Burglar Rat on turn 2. We'll make them discard. You know, you get to look at 2 cards and they discard 1. That is not how that works because both those creatures are rogues, right? You have to have different creatures in your party of different creature types to get these extra bonuses some of the time. And this is one of those. You know, you have to have a cleric and a wizard and a rogue and a warrior, so forth and so on. For this to really get big, but it is only 1 mana, and if you have literally just one other creature that fits into the party sub-theme, then suddenly you got a 1 mana 2/2, and that's actually really good. And you can randomly make it like 3/3 and gain flying, or any other creature that you happen to have, but I think a lot of the time you'll just give it the bonus. I mean, again, it depends on your board state, but I really like the idea behind this card. This is one of those cards that's really undercosted for what the stats are probably going to be. Even if it just ends up being like a 3/2 or something, right? That still seems good to me. Later on in the game. And once you assemble a full party, you've paid 1 mana for a relatively large dude. So I like a lot about this card, and I think it's going to be one of the things that if the party deck is going to be competitive at all, this is probably one of the pieces of glue that holds it together, along with the 2 mana thing that we saw yesterday, the 2 mana 3/2, that's all the party creature types, as well as elf. I mean, it's a good start, at the very least, when building a core for a deck like this. So turns out you don't have to just play bad cards if you want to play the party deck, but I still think you're probably playing with a pretty bad mechanic in terms of competitive Magic if you want to build the competitive party deck. But we'll see. I saw somebody had the idea yesterday to play that new Burglar Rat guy, the rogue. in like a Doom Foretold deck. Now, we might be able to see like a party-based Doom Foretold deck with mostly creatures that have entered the battlefield triggers and also fit the party subtype. And that way you can use the new tutor thing that allows you to just like pay 1 mana to tutor something up that's 4 cost or less and play it for free. You tutor up Doom Foretold with that. Things are getting kind of spicy when it comes to the party deck, and there's a lot of different directions I've seen people want to take. I'm excited to brew with the party sub-theme, but I'm holding my breath for now. Let me put it that way. Up next, I have to translate this card, so let me let the page load up real quick. All right, this is Hellhound of Akoum, or Akoum Hellhound, more likely, I would say. Let me make sure that I get rid of the advertising for eBay down here. Hellhound is just 1 red mana for a 0/1 elemental dog with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Hellhound gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So this is effectively step links. And it is common too. I want to point that out. This is maybe Pauper playable in like a mono red list. So get excited about that. And that is definitely something to get excited about. I like Pauper as a format. So I wonder if the Pauper people are freaking out about this card, because it actually looks pretty decent. You know, it's 2 in a row 1 mana creatures that can have 2 power. And if you do have like Euro, and people have pointed out Risen Reef in Historic once rotation happens, you know, there's plenty of ways, Zeus Lost but Seeking, Cultivate, and yada yada yada, to get multiple lands into play at the same time. And then this thing just gets huge. But honestly, I think if you're just playing it in mono red or just the dogs deck, you know, Boros dogs, then most of the time it's going to be a 2/3 until like turn 4, turn 5, if everything goes correctly. And that's actually really good. You know, those are the turns where your aggro deck is going to live anyway. Like, hopefully you hit your land drop on your Embercleave turn, and this is relatively big for the attack. But one way or the other, I think this is probably, like, really dope, especially in a set that has a bunch of, you know, land drop spells. You know, things that are spells on one half and land drops on the other. And people have been saying, well, you'll never play it as a land, and I think that's the worst take ever. For a whole lot of reasons, but landfall being in this set, and especially landfall on a card like this, it's more aggro oriented, really gives you, you know, more of a reason to want to play the land half of these spell, you know, flip lands. So just want to point that out too. I think this card has a lot of implications, whether it's a landfall deck, a mono red aggro deck, the Boros Dogs deck. There's just so many things this goes in. And I really like what they did with the place, you know, in that Cards I Want in Zendikar Rising video, where I just made up a bunch of cards. Thanks for liking that video, by the way. I said I wanted a 1-drop dog, but whether it be red or white, I just want a 1-drop dog for that deck to make it more competitive. Here we go. Thank you, Wizards. You did the thing I wanted, so I appreciate that. But let's move on to Skyclave Apparition down here. This is actually one of the better cards spoiled in the last 24 hours. This is just 1 and 2 white for a 2/2 core spirit. And when it ETBs, you exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with converted mana cost 4 or less. When Skyclave Apparition leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card. So it's like a Fiend Hunter, Banisher Priest, like a take on one of these Deputed Retention, which is rotating out of the format. So this is a good replacement for Deputy in your Thassa decks and stuff. This actually looks pretty decent. I like the combo with this and like Containment Priest, exiled creatures. It exiles creatures that enter the battlefield and weren't cast. So read tokens 90% of the time. So this is an interesting little, you know, 2-drop into 3-drop combo in some ways with Containment Priest. And I do like that. It's decent for blinking if your opponent has a lot of high-profile permanents to take down. And that's the most important thing about it. You know, you can hit enchantments with this, you can hit planeswalkers with this, and the best thing your opponent's going to get back is a creature. So that's actually really dope. You know, it has to be something with 4, you know, CMC 4 or less. So that does kind of restrict you from hitting things like Elspeth Conquers Death or, you know, the 5-mana Nissa in Historic, for instance. But I still think that this is a really playable card. It's going to hit Questing Beasts, and if your opponent ever does get rid of Skyclave Apparition, then they don't get Questing Beasts back. They just get a vanilla 4/4, which is fine. It's a lot better than a Questing Beast. So there's a lot of cool things about this card. I love that they don't get their card back. So this is just, you know, exile target non-land permanent. It is non-token. I've seen a lot of people not seeing that the word non-token is on this card. And it's led them to a lot of weird evaluations. But yeah, the word non-token is on this card, so you can't just hit, you know, a big token dude. But there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this. I like it against, say, Stonecoil Serpent, for instance. It's an interesting, you know, interplay with that card. So there's a lot of cool interactions with this. I like it a lot, as a matter of fact, and I think it probably will show up in Standard, because creatures like this usually do. You even stuff like Fiend Hunter that just gives them their creature back when your Skyclave dies, will still often show up in some standard decks. So I could see this seeing some play, especially considering like this set looks slightly powered down, which is something that a lot of us were asking for. I'd like to get back to the days of fair Magic. And with stuff like Narset, Nissa, Hydroid Krasis rotating out, I think that we're probably going to return to a little bit more fair Magic, Euro notwithstanding. But at the same time, I think that in a fair format, a card like Skyclave looks really, really attractive. But moving on to the stuff that was actually spoiled today, let's translate this. This is actually one of the more hyped cards of the day. This does not look very good at first glance to some players, but I actually think this is one of the better cards of the day. Notice that it only has one comment on Mythic Spoiler. I don't even know what that comment is, but on the Spikes subreddit, there are people going crazy over this card. I think it was Andrea Mengucci, but I might be getting that wrong. A pro on Twitter that I respect, but I follow a lot of them, so I see a lot of their takes. It may not have been Mengu, but I think it was. He was just like freaking out over this. Because this is a really interesting card for control decks. And you could put it in the mono-white life gain deck or the black-white life gain deck. It is a Cleric, and black-white life gain looks to be a Cleric-based deck this time around. You could even say that life gain itself looks to be a black-white-based Cleric deck, but I don't know if I'd go that far. You can still build mono-white life gain, and it's good. It's kind of been tearing up the 2021 queue on Arena. So I think mono-white life gain is still a thing, but if you do build black-white Clerics, you put it in, because this is actually pretty dope. I do like these spell lands, a card on one half, land on the other. Make sure you hit your drops when you need to. Make sure you trigger landfall when you need to. I mean, in this set, this is something people haven't really pointed out, but in this set, playing a spell or playing a land is like playing a spell if you have landfall guys out. So, I can see you really prioritize hitting your drops more in this set. So that'll be great in limited and constructed as far as I'm concerned for making sure that you get landfall triggers when you want them. But in this card's case, it can be a land drop against other control decks. Slower matchups, you want to be able to hit your lands, but whoever has the most resources usually wins in a control mirror of some kind. But if you're playing against an aggro deck, this is actually pretty decent. It gives you a little bump in life. It's a nice little speed bump, big butt block stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can say about this if you want to play it in the early game to stop the bleeding a little bit. I could see a control deck playing this and maybe coming down like a land or two. Right? Because this is kind of like a sort of sideboardy card that you probably wouldn't play in your sideboard, in most cases. But it does seem like something that, in limited you'd sideboard in against a more aggressive deck or something. But, in this case, you get the upside of if you don't need this, if you're not playing against an aggro deck, something that you need to stop the bleeding against, then suddenly you have a land drop. And in the games where you're not playing against aggro, suddenly your land drops will often matter a lot. So I could definitely see, against aggro, you don't want to stumble on land drops either, but again, the more resource-rich player usually wins in control and mid-range mirrors. So, if you need to hit your drops, this allows you to do that too. I'm just really excited for this. I think that this is kind of likely to do something, and again, it looks very unassuming when you first read it, but I think this is one of the stronger spell flip lands. We got to come up with a snazzy name for these, y'all. I do think this is actually like subtly one of the stronger cards of the day, to be honest with you. But we'll move on here. We got so much to talk about. Let's look at Yamara Wizard and Yamara Skyfalls, because one transforms. Well, not transforms, but it's another one of these flips. You can either play it as a tap land that creates blue mana, or you can play Wizard. This is 5 mana, 4 in a blue for a 4/3 Merfolk Wizard. And whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, Yamara Wizard gains flying until end of turn. I've seen a lot of people just like loving the 2 mana 1/3 gain 2 life guy, but completely writing this off on the Spikes subreddit. And I think it's kind of dangerous. I think that there are probably better control finishers to be playing right now. We got Dream Trawler, Lockmere Serpent. There's a couple of arguments for good control finisher, especially Dream Trawler, but I kind of sort of like the idea behind this card, even in Constructed. I don't think it's going to make Constructed play at all, because a 5 mana 4/3 with no real evasion is bad. But if you're playing a control deck, it shouldn't be too hard to crack off an instant or sorcery during your turn. And suddenly, a few bites should end the game against an opponent. So it's interesting, but more likely relegated to budget decks than real constructed, like competitive decks. But I'm going to say is I kind of like this card, right? If you get it in the early game, it's a land drop. Sometimes if you get it in the late game, it can be a land drop if you want it. But otherwise, you just play it as a threat. Sometimes it's kind of a removal spell in that it puts a blocker in front of your opponent's biggest creature, you know, blocks and kills a questing beast or something. But if you needed to, it can become offensive and just race your opponent for a couple of turns in your control deck. So there are things I like about this card, but again, I think it's way overcosted for standard play. But, you know, the flexibility is what I like about this. I saw somebody on the Spike subreddit earlier say something like, oh, y'all just think that you can play with bad cards because of flexibility and it's going to work out. Like, yeah, historically, yes, that's absolutely what you can do. But standard has been a format time and time again where versatility and flexibility matter, not necessarily above all else, but they matter a lot more than people usually think they do. And cards that pull double duty like this are always going to be at least worth a look, more so than most people are saying. And again, I don't get why you'd love the 2-mana guy and hate this 5-mana guy. The 2-mana guy is definitely better. I'll give you that. But I still think Wizard is at least worth looking at. Let me put it that way. But moving on to Into the Royal, we've seen this card before. It has been in Zendikar sets, because the Royal is a thing in Zendikar, but it's just 1 and a blue for an instant if you haven't seen this. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, but if you pay the 1 and a blue kicker, you also draw a card. So it's kind of a blink of the eye effect, but without this freaky art, you know. So there is that. This has been a standard playable card in the past, and it could be again, but again, standard's going to have to be like significantly powered down for this to see too much play. There's probably a lot better choices in this, but I guess in a tempo or even control deck, this is sometimes an option. But you know, right now we have things like Brazen Borrower, which doesn't draw a card, but it always draws a 3/1 flyer. So, you know, I'm just not sure that decks will have room for a card like Into the World. But in the past, this has been a decent, reliable standard card. Even in the recent past, if you do want to count Blink of an Eye, because that saw some standard play. But we'll see if this does. I'm not sure how much I like bounce effects in current standard. But wow, you really left us off way above where we were. But let's take a look at this next card here, which is Concordant Spell. This is 4 and a red for an instant. Concordant Spell does 4 damage to target creature and X damage to that creature's controller, where X is equal to the number of creatures in your party. Now, the party spells that aren't creatures, right, I don't like these near as much, because the ones that are creatures will almost always count themselves towards whatever bonus they're giving you for having a party. But this requires that you actually have some creatures out. You don't get anything out of it. It just does pretty much nothing if you don't have party members. Now, of course, it's still a removal spell. You'll still play this like a 1 of it in limited. It's a common. You know, it costs a little bit much, but it's instant speed. It'll take out most of the creatures in the format. So don't get me wrong, it's playable removal in limited, but it's also something I'm not like super excited about. This 5 mana is very, very steep even for that effect in limited. But moving on, let's look at Sneaking Guide here. Just 1 mana for a Goblin Rogue. It's a 1/1. You can pay 2 and tap it to have a creature with power 2 or less not be able to be blocked this turn. It's always awkward the way I end up saying it. But yeah, this ability that we've seen more and more lately is a very red ability. It just prevents small dudes from being blocked. He's got it, but you got to pay mana for it. There's a couple of cards already in the format that are like 2-drops, and you just tap them to make a creature unblockable with this power. And these just don't see play, but it is a goblin. There's a goblin's deck in standard. It is a rogue. There's a rogue's deck in standard. It's a rogue, so there's a party deck in standard. Who knows? But all in all, I really don't think this is good enough. And I don't really like playing 1-drops in limited, although we might have to if we want to put together a good party. So, again, if you're looking for a party, this, you know, you could do worse. But I don't love this card. Moving on to Greytag Nightrunner. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/3 Goblin Rogue. Another one of those. Whenever Nightrunner deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So this, kind of dope. 3 mana, 2/3, not the best stat line in the world, but again, it's a rogue, so it fills out your party in limited. In a color that doesn't seem to have all the party support in the world, right? Like, red's going to have warriors and rogues, and I'm not really sure what else. Maybe a wizard here or there. But, you know, helps you fill out your party, and it's effectively card advantage. You don't get to hold on to removal spells in your hand. You don't get to draw the card and keep it until you need it or whatever. But this kind of pseudo card advantage in a really aggressive low to the ground limited deck might actually be really good. And it might be, again, if you're looking for an aggressive red deck, it might be one of the uncommons you want to be looking for. But again, I'm a little wary of it because the stat line is fairly bad. But the combat damage effect is good enough that I would probably play a copy or 2 of this card if I got it. In terms of uncommon 3-drops, it's probably going to be one of the better ones you could be playing in red, but that remains to be seen. Demon's Disciple is next. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/1 human cleric. And when it ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. So it's Plague Crafter, but worse. It's just worse than Plague Crafter. You don't make them discard a card. It's a little bit smaller in the butt department. But altogether, that looks an awful lot like Plague Crafter with a couple of, important creature types. Namely Cleric in this set. And, Plague Crafter and cards like it, Fleshbag Marauder, for instance, usually have their role to fill in Standard, but they're also not, like, the most exciting cards in the world. So, again, role player will show up every now and again, but probably not the most dynamic thing. But let's move on to Kaza Royal Chaser, and this card looks really sweet. This is a red and a blue for a 1/2 legendary human wizard with flying and haste. And if you tap it, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you control as the ability resolves. So note the as the ability resolves. That's interesting that they added that. Of course, if you tap it for mana, and it's the only wizard out, and they somehow, they shock it in response or something, you won't get any mana out of it. But it is worth noting that even if you don't have any other wizards out whatsoever, this still is a mana dork, right? Like, it still taps for 1 mana to cast an instant or sorcery, which is kind of dope. And it's also a flying haster, it goes really well with all the pump spells. I like that. There's a lot of really cool things about this card, and in Historic, maybe it goes with, like, Odalise or something. There's a lot of cool things you could probably do with this, and I'm excited to brew with it, but, there's, like, Storming Entity, Riddle Form, Sprite Dragon, all those cards in the red-blue tempo deck, and I'm not sure this replaces any of them, honestly, but if we get, a deck that wants to play a fair number of wizards, along with a really expensive instant or sorcery that those wizards then, allow us to cast really early in the game. If we see exactly that combination of things, the Royal Chaser deck might be real, but altogether this looks like a really cool card that might have a little bit more relevance in Historic than it does in Standard. But again, we haven't seen this whole set yet, so we'll see. But it might just be, based on stats alone, worth putting in the red-blue tempo deck. But again, we'll have to see about that. Up next is Anti-Cognition. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target creature or planeswalker spell unless its controller pays 2. If an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead counter that spell and scry 2. Everyone says this goes in the Rogues deck. Probably. It's probably maybe a sideboard card in the Rogues deck. I do think the word planeswalker on this matters an awful lot. Because whether or not your opponent has 8 cards in their yard, this will probably counter an Ugin. This will very likely counter Ugin the Spirit Dragon. And if they have 8 cards in the yard, it definitely counters Ugin, and you get a scry off of it, which seems like a really good deal for 2 mana. But this isn't a great replacement for, like, Negate or Disdainful Stroke in my eyes. I think Essence Scatter is, in a lot of ways, just going to be the better card most of the time. But that said, maybe like 1 copy in a control deck, or maybe 1 copy in the Fae of Wishes, like Wishboard. Possibly. I mean, being able to counter Ugin again is a really big deal. And there's probably going to be some expensive creatures in this format it might be important to counter too. So I kind of like the cut of the card's jib, but I'm not sure that it's actually better than Essence Scatter, in 80% of cases. But we'll move on to a bunch of bad-looking cards. All of these are spoiled on Good Morning Magic, which is a show hosted by Gavin Verhey, who literally works for Wizards, so I have no idea why these card images look so terrible, but they do. Here's Resolute Strike for just 1 white mana. It's an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. If it's a warrior, you may attach an equipment you control to it. That might actually be super dope. This card might be better than I think it is. Honestly, just in terms of combat tricks, 1 mana, +2/+2, it's not bad. It's really not terrible, and it's playable sometimes and limited if you need a combat trick for your aggressive deck. So I can see running it for that reason, but just attaching an equipment to it is also, like, that could be amazing, especially since we have Embercleave in the format right now. That seems good. It would also be pretty sweet to just throw a Shadow Spear on something as a surprise. It seems like that could get out of hand. So there's some cool things about this card, but I doubt it sees too much play unless it sees all the play. What is it? Colossus Hammer, the thing that costs like $1 billion to equip, but it gives the creature +10/+10, and the creature loses flying. You can equip it for 1 mana with a Resolute Strike in Historic, so keep that tech in your back pocket. But anyway, we're moving on to Teeter Peak Ambusher. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/3 Goblin Warrior. And you pay 2 and a red to have it get +2/+0 till end of turn. That's the whole card. Brushfire Elemental, on the other hand, is worth talking about, I think. This is just a red and a green for a 1/1 elemental with haste, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. The old questing beast ability everyone forgets about. It also has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Brushfire Elemental gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So we kind of have a 2 mana, 3/3 haste. That can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less, which is actually not bad. Not bad at all. And if you can get it up to like a 5/5 by dropping 2 lands on the same turn, then it's actually doing some pretty sweet stuff for you. So maybe in the red-green landfall deck, I mean, we already saw the red 1-drop that can get big because of landfall, the red step links. And this is a pretty good 2-drop or 3-drop because note again it has haste, so you can play it on turn 3 and then drop a land, swing 3, which I don't think is a bad line to have access to. I really like Brushfire Elemental, and I'm not actually convinced it's going to show up, but if there is an aggressive landfall deck that's good enough, this is obviously like the 2-drop of choice. It's a little bit pushed, and I like that. It didn't have to have haste, but it does, and that's sweet. Moving on to Mckindy Ox. The art is the absolute best part of this card. This is 5 mana, 4 and a white for a 4/4 Ox. It has landfall. Whenever you landfall, you tap a creature an opponent controls. That's not great. It's really not. I mean, a 5 mana 4/4 is at least somewhat playable and limited, although it's not the best stat line. And, you know, if you need a tapper, this does it without you having to actually tap the Ox. And usually tappers are relatively cheap creatures that you have to tap other stuff down. This isn't like that, and I kind of like that you don't actually have to tap the Ox, so you can still attack with your 4/4 and tap stuff down. So that's okay, but I'm not super excited about it. The art is gorgeous. And kind of funny at the same time. I don't know why this art entertains me so much, but the color palette is delicious. But moving on, there's Rabid Bite. You know what Rabid Bite does. It's just a bite effect. We've named a whole effect after this card. 2 mana for sorcery. A creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a creature you don't control. That's what Rabid Bite does. It's a fight effect, but the creature doesn't hit back, so it's quite good. This is a really good green removal spell, traditionally in Limited, and even sometimes in Constructed. You know, we need this to still exist in the format for the Death Touch deck to exist. So there's that. But moving on, here's Field Research. This is, well, I guess we could still play Ram Through, which is a better card. But anyway, Field Research is 2 and a blue for sorcery, with kicker 2 and a blue. You draw 2 cards. If the spell was kicked, draw 3 cards instead. So for 3 mana, it's a Divination. Sorcery speed, draw 2 for 3 mana. But you can pay 6 to draw 3, which is bad, especially at sorcery speed. But again, maybe some like limited slow control decks might play this sometimes, especially if you pick up a sweeper of some kind in your pool. Then a card like Divination can be pretty decent because on turn 3 you can at the very least get more land drops, which you're always going to want, or you can draw into your sweeper or whatever removal that you happen to get. And sometimes a refill can be great in the mid-game. So, like, I can see playing 1 copy of this in a blue limited deck and it not being bad, especially in sealed, which is a little bit slower of a format. But altogether, I don't love it. But that said, divination effects have been worth playing in sealed in the past. So this is effectively a strictly better divination effect, so it's probably worth playing. But moving on is Risen Riptide. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 0/5 elemental. Whenever you cast a kicked spell, Risen Riptide has base power and toughness 5/5 till end of turn. Oh boy. So it turns into a questing beast whenever you cast a kick spell, which is interesting, but unless there's a ton of cards with kicker, I don't even know if this is going to be worth playing in limited. I'm not sure. You know, the fail case of just having a 3 mana 0/5 for a bunch of turns, I don't love, but I do love this art. Again, this art is very cool. But moving on, we have Goldraw's Mucklord, which is a crocodile, and he's making a great face. Look at this. Look at him going, meh. What is this pose that he's in? But anyway, 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 2/3 croc. And when it dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's the whole card. Haggar Constrictor is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 0/0 snake that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has menace. So basically a 3 mana, 2/2 menace. If you happen to have other +1/+1 counter stuff, it also has menace. This could either be a really important build around common and draft, or nothing. It could be nothing at all, and it might be that. But moving on, look at Oblivion's Hunger, which is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature you control gains indestructible till the end of turn. Draw a card if that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. So you see here we have a light +1/+1 counter sub-theme in black. At the very least black, if not other colors. Maybe there's also a sub-theme in green. But all these cards will help each other out in some way or another. 2 mana, indestructible, replace itself if the creature has a +1/+1 counter. It actually seems like kind of dope, but nowhere near good enough for standard play. Moving on is Subtle Strike. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant. Choose one or both. Target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn, or put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Stuff like this has actually been decent in the past, but I think the last time we saw this effect, it cost 1 mana. If you remember Skullduggery, I think that was the name of the card, and that was actually a very, very good limited card. Almost kind of had a reputation in that limited environment. I think it was Ixalan Limited. This doesn't look quite as good, but it's still effectively removal and an amazing combat trick some of the time too. So if you are playing a really aggressive black strategy, I could definitely see playing at least one of this card, but I wouldn't play more than one, like literally ever. What have I done? Oh, I just went to Mucklord. I guess I wanted to see him dancing. Whatever he's doing. For some reason, he looks like Barney the Dinosaur to me. But we'll move on to Utility Knife. This is a 1 mana equipment that gives a creature +1/+1 and equips for 3, but when it ETBs, you attach it to a creature you control, which is kind of decent. I mean, it's not standard playable, but in some of these limited strategies where you're trying to pull together the equipment sub-theme in the set, then I could definitely see Utility Knife working. It's also a 1 mana equipment if you want to get the ultimate off for a decent amount on Nahiri, who, you know, that ultimate does damage to a target equal to the number of equipment you control. So little 1 mana deuter equipments like this might actually be kind of decent, right? Could go well on like a Fervent Champion, you know, just go ahead and attach it to the champion. Champion's now a 2-power, you know, first striker. There's a lot of cool things about Utility Knife, but I highly doubt a card like this sees real play. Moving on to Tormenting Voice. You know what Tormenting Voice does. 2 mana, sorcery. You got to discard a card to cast it, and then you draw 2 cards. It's in a bunch of stuff. It always sees play in some niche deck or another. Niche, is that how you say it? Niche or niche? It's niche. A niche deck, somewhere here or there. It might show up. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, is the hypest card that got spoiled on stream, or from Good Morning Magic this morning. I guess all these are actual real Magic cards, which is why the pictures of them are terrible. But Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a star legendary elemental. And that star and that other star are both equal to the number of lands that you control. But here's the thing, right? Non-token creatures you control are forests. They're forest lands in addition to their other types. Note, too, that means you can tap them for green mana, which is maybe the best part of this card, is just being able to tap all your like little elves for mana, if you couldn't already do that. I don't know why I used elves, the creature that taps for mana, as my example there, but if you just have like a bunch of little dudes, sucks they can't be tokens. They really took all the fun out of this card, didn't they? If you have a bunch of little dudes, suddenly they tap for all the mana. You cast like Nyx Bloom Ancient really easily, which is cool. But also, at the same time, if you have a board full of lands and a board full of dudes out, suddenly Ashaya is like a 10/10. The problem is that it's just a vanilla 10/10. Like that's all it really is stats. And that's proven to not necessarily be good enough in the past. But this kind of, sort of, a little bit reminds me of Nissa, 5 mana Nissa from War of the Spark. Not enough to make me think the card is good, honestly. I don't think this card is very good. But I could eat those words, because Nissa doubled the amount of mana that your lands produce. This doesn't necessarily double the amount of mana you produce the turn it comes down, but it's sometimes, if you have enough creatures, it can pay for itself the turn it comes down by turning on this ability for all your creatures. So that's interesting. And then if you untap with it the next turn, then suddenly you have a ton of mana available to you, right? You have whatever lands, plus your land drop for the turn, plus, you know, this guy can tap for mana. I want to throw that out there. This guy can tap for mana, plus the other 2 or 3 or 4 creatures you have on the board. So, you know, if you resolve Ashaya and live, and it lives until the next turn you untap, then suddenly you probably have like 8 to 10 mana available. You can drop your Ugin. So in that way, it kind of reminds me of Nissa Who Shakes the World, which means I hate it. I hate it. And I hope that it's not good, because it looks like it's just trying to be a sort of sideways, sneaky, fixed version of a card like Nissa. Because again, the turn after you play this, if you have a decent board state, you have all of the mana. You have literally every mana you could ever want. So this looks like a card like that, but I hope it does nothing. I hope this card does literally nothing in Standard, and it's bad forever. You know, like Nissa didn't die to Heartless Act, and this does. So I think stuff like that might make a huge difference. But we're going to move on to Arden Electromancer. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/2 human wizard. When it ETBs, you add red for each creature in your party. I like this thing. It effectively only costs 2 mana. You know, they've had to like ban Burning Tree Emissary from Historic, and they haven't learned their lesson. Although I do think that just a 3 mana vanilla 3/2 is not a great end case, because yeah, you got some mana, but What do you, I mean, you got a kind of a lame body out of it, but at least you still got a body, you know, a body that produces mana. There are times where if you have enough people in your party, this is actually going to more than pay for itself. There's probably some cool stuff you can do with that, but even if you just have this and one other party member, suddenly, it produces 2 mana when it comes into play. It effectively only costs you 1 mana. You still have 2 mana to spend on that turn. I could actually see this card being ridiculous. You know, not necessarily Burning Tree levels, but, you know, turn 1 Rogue, turn 2 Cleric or Warrior more likely in red. And then turn 3 this. And then suddenly, you play this and it's free. You just get to play another one. And then you can play another 3-drop. And that happens with Burning Tree all the time. Burning Tree into 2-drop, we see that constantly. This requires a little bit more work on board to get to that, but it shouldn't be too hard to go, you know, turn 1 Rogue, turn 2 Warrior, turn 3 Electromancer, into 3-drop, and that's actually super dangerous. So, of all the party cards spoiled so far, I think Electromancer is one of the ones I actually like the most. Even if the end result, what is all this? Even if the end result is just, you know, a vanilla 3-2. I think that it's probably worth it, especially if you can get to chaining them. That looks really sexy to me. But moving on, here's Kite Cleric right here. This is just 1 white mana for a 1/1 core Cleric with flying and kicker 2 and a white. When it ETBs, if it was kicked, you tap up to 2 target creatures. I kind of think this is really interesting. Just a 1 mana 1/1 flyer is something that the blue-white flyers deck is looking for to replace a couple of things, but for the most part, that's not what I'm most impressed by. Because we have seen some blue flyers for 1 mana that are probably just better than this, all things considered. But, you know, the blue-white flyers deck is a tempo deck at heart, so there's going to be times playing against other aggro decks, especially other aggro decks with flyers, where it might actually be worth it to hold this off until turn 4 just to get the tap 2 dudes effect and get in for the win. So I like the idea of this card, but I don't think it quite makes the cut in blue-white flyers at the end of the day. But moving on, let's look at Core Blade Master. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 core warrior with double strike. Equipped warriors you control have double strike. Neat. That's redundant with Embercleave, so the most important equipment in the format this doesn't work with. But do note that it works really well with a Shadow Spear. That's kind of neat, you know. Just any other warrior you can throw a Shadow Spear on, suddenly it has, what is it, trample, lifelink, and double strike. That seems good, especially considering Shadow Spear isn't much of an initial investment to begin with. So I kind of like it, not gonna lie, but I'm not sure how good the card is. But at the very least, it's a fencing ace. It's a fencing ace with a good creature type, and that's probably good. You know, just on its face, it's probably decent. But moving on, let's look at Floor Stalker. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 Merfolk Rogue with 4 and a blue. Floor Stalker gets +1/+0 till end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each creature in your party, so it really only ever costs 4 mana if you have no other creatures out, rather than 5. Keep that in mind. But, you know, I don't hate this either. 3 mana, 2/3, again, not a great stat line, but at least it has a decent creature type. It really only costs 4 mana to make it unblockable. Sometimes that'll win a game of limited for you. So I could see this being a sort of, you know, 23rd creature in your limited deck if you're looking for something to fill the deck out. I could see it working out. You know, as far as commons go, it's not the worst rate in the world. But moving on, let's look at a Koum Warrior. This is 6 mana, 5 and a red for a 4/5 trample. It's a Minotaur Warrior, in case you wanted to know. But you can also play a Koum Teeth instead. It's just a red source that enters tapped. It turns out that there are a lot of these. There are at least like 2 of these in each color, which is more than we thought they were going to be. But this one is not good looking to me. I guess there are points in the game where if you rip a 6 mana 4/5 trample off the top, you'll be happy about that. But ultimately, I think this is one of the land things, the flip lands, it's least likely to see play. But the next 2, the green ones, I think are actually super likely to see play. We got Bellagate Sanctuary and Bellagate Recovery. Bellagate Sanctuary, just green source, enters tap. But Bellagate Recovery is a sorcery, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's like a recover or regrowth effect. That's just also could be a land if you need a land. That's good. That's a really good card. I'm not sure how much this standard play this is going to ultimately see, but I could definitely see it seeing some standard play, possibly. However, the other one is the one I really like. Now, we got Colony Territory, which is just a green source and enters tap, and Colony Ambush. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So on one side, it's a land drop if you missed a land drop against control if they don't have any creatures to fight or whatever. And on the other side, it's a removal spell at instant speed. If this was just a 3 mana sorcery, I might balk on it a little bit, but at the instant speed makes me really, really like this an awful lot. I mean, a removal spell on one side, land on the other, that seems incredible to me. So I'm a big fan of this. Again, I'm not sure that it shows up, but in a stompy deck that wants to hit its drops but also wants cards like this, I could see this seeing some play over Ram through. I really could. So I like this card a good bit. But moving on, let's look at Sejiri Shelter and Sejiri Glacier. Glacier, of course, enters the battlefield tapped, you add a white. If you want to trigger landfall or you need the land drop badly enough, you got this for consistency. But Shelter is 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice till end of turn. So a God's Willing for double the mana that you don't get a scry on. I think the God's Willing is probably more worth playing in this format, but there are decks like the mono white enchantments deck or the green white enchantments deck that might want something like this. You'd still play Karametra's Blessing, but you might play this over God's Willing because those decks play relatively low lands, usually 20 or 21. And a card like this could actually help you hit your drops, and that could be very important for a deck like that. So I think they'll probably continue playing stuff like God's Willing, but we could say this in some number. But moving on, here's Prowling Felidar, another interesting arted card. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 2/3 cat beast with vigilance. It has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you put a counter on it, a +1/+1 counter. Good, probably in limited. Although I will say, it won't become a 3/4 until like the next turn, and it won't become a 4/5 until the next turn. And 4/5 is probably where it starts being really good. So it's a little bit slow, and you have to hit your drops, but again, all these, flip lands make it much more likely that you'll hit your drops. I wonder what the theoretical best number of lands to play in Limited is, if you have some of these lands. Usually we say play 17 or 18 lands in Limited, but, if you have like 2 or 3 of these cards, how many fewer lands do you play? That's an interesting question. But moving on, we're getting into some stuff now. Swarm Shambler, y'all. This is one of the best cards of the day, I think. Just 1 green mana for a 0/0 fungus beast that ETBs with a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. You can pay 1 and tap this to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. So it can be bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes on. I like 1-drops that get bigger as the game goes on. This could be a replacement for Pelt Collector, but it doesn't get to attack in the meantime. Just playing stuff doesn't make it bigger. I don't know how much I love that aspect of it. I don't think it's the replacement for Pelt Collector. Well, let me put it this way. I don't think it's a good replacement for Pelt Collector, but I do think it is the replacement for Pelt Collector. Whether we like it or not. I do like that it's kind of removal proof. It reminds me of like a green Hunted Witness, or a green Doom Traveler, green Garrison Cat, whatever you want to call it. Just these 1-mana creatures that have 1 power, and when they die, you get a 1/1. Because most of the time, your opponent does target it with removal, it's going to be to kill it with a spot removal spell. So you'll get a 1/1 out of it in those cases. I do see fail states with this, where it's literally just a 1-mana 1/1 that never gets any bigger, and just dies in combat and doesn't even generate the 1/1. I mean, there's definitely fail cases with this, but in terms of value for 1 mana, it gives you something to do with your mana. It's kind of a mana sink in the late game. If it's not, checked, if it's left unchecked, it can get reasonably big over the course of the game. And I like a lot about it. It's a little bit removal proof because your opponent's eventually going to be incentivized to shoot it down, but when they do, you at least get the 1/1. So I don't know. I kind of really like this card an awful lot, and I will maintain that it's one of the better cards of the day, but we'll see how good it is as a replacement for our green 1-drop of choice right now. But moving on, let's look at Thwart the Grave. This is really dope art. I just want to point that out. Really like this art. But it's 6 mana, 4 and 2 black, but not really. It's a sorcery that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Return target creature card and up to 1 target cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, this can just cost 2 mana to get a huge creature back along with another creature. But if this only costs 4 mana, if it becomes a zombify, I think it's still playable, honestly. And it shouldn't be too hard to get 2 members of a party out. And if you've tried to assemble a party that game, your opponent's probably killed a couple of your guys, right? So you'll almost certainly have at least one, if not both guys that you can get back from the yard with this. Maybe you've milled or discarded a huge creature, but while you're trying to assemble your party, your opponent's also spot removed one of your party members. This can get that back too. So I think that this is definitely the kind of card that the deck wants. It kind of reminds me of Call of the Death Dweller. If you can get this to cast or cost 3 mana, and get a reasonably big creature back with it, I think that it's probably better than Call by a lot. And if you can get it to cost 2, then yeah, it's obviously better. But I think Call's the better card on its face because you don't have to work so hard to get to the best case on call, where there's a lot of work you have to do to get the best case on Thwart. But either way, even if you don't get the full discount, it only costs 3 or 4 mana. I think it's still like probably a pretty decent card. But moving on, here's Ravager's Mace right here. This is 3 mana, 1 a black and a red for an equipment. When it ETBs, attach it to a creature you control. I like that trend on these equipments in this set. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each creature in your party and has menace. You equip this for 4 mana naturally, but obviously you're going to get 1 shot for free. And it's not too bad, right? Again, this doesn't add to your party total at all by itself, and usually I don't necessarily love, spells that want to play off the party sub-theme, but at the same time don't actually attribute to the party sub-theme. Thwart the Grave, though, is one of those spells that's powerful enough to consider even without it actually attributing to your party total. But Ravager's Mace, not necessarily. This doesn't look super great, but if the creature gets +2/+0 and has menace, then it's, I don't know, it's still a worse like Bone Splitter, but it's still okay, I guess. But I just don't see it being worth playing the slot in a constructed deck. Even in the party-centric deck, I just don't know that it'd be worth it. But in limited, if you can make this like a +2/+0 and menace, it doesn't seem too bad. But moving on, here's Deadly Alliance. 5 mana, 4 and a black. It's exactly the spell you expected to be in this set. An instant that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Destroy a creature or planeswalker. So, it kind of reminds me of, what was it, Murderous Cut from Khans of Tarkir, but of course Delve is a much better ability than this. If this only costs you 1 mana to cast, it's obviously very good, especially at instant speed. But of course, if it costs you 3 mana to cast, it's not great. If it costs you 2 mana to cast, it is great, but I'm still not totally sure how much I like this. I think that if you're building the party deck, black does look like a really attractive color to go into. Mostly because of Thwart and the tutor thing, and the rogues look really good in black, so I could definitely see playing black in your party deck. And this looks like it would probably be a 1 or 2 of as just your piece of removal of choice. How Drag to the Underworld is played on occasion in the mono black devotion decks because it's the devotion removal piece. Well, this is the party removal piece. Good luck playing it. Here, though, oh my god, here's Nighthawk Scavenger, y'all. We got to it. Oh my god, this is 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 1+ star 3 Vampire Rogue with Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink. Scavenger's power is equal to 1+ the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. This is dope. This is a little bit harder to control than it looks like, right? But the floor on this card is a 3 mana 1/3 Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink, and that's not bad. That's really not that bad. It's not terrible at all. If you've milled your opponent, which obviously the black-based Rogues deck will do, the one with Thieves Guild Enforcer, it will do that. So if you've milled your opponent, it's very likely they have, 2, 3 different card types in their yard. And then suddenly, this is a big dude for the cost that you paid for it. It's obviously a Vampire Nighthawk. That's what it's supposed to be. But it's not going to be hard to get it to 2 power, much less like 3 or 4. There's going to be cards like Merfolk's Secret Keeper that mill them, 4 cards or whatever. And just those 4 cards, you'll probably get at least 2 card types. You get a land, an instant, a creature, whatever. So even in like 1 or 2 mills, I could see getting enough mills to make this thing big when you play it on turn 3. If you go like Enforcer into Enforcer or double Enforcer. Or the thing that, the new 1 mana blue thing that mills your opponent to when it enters the battlefield. You play that on turn 1 or 2, and then you play this. It's probably going to be, like, reasonably big for what you paid for it. I like this card, like, an awful lot. And I think they're kind of pushing the Rogues deck, honestly. Like, just a really good-looking card to me. It's all stats and keywords, but that's good. That's good. When it's these 3 keywords on these stats for this cost, yeah, it's good. This is worth it. I like this card. But moving on, here's Dauntless Survivor. Just 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/1 human warrior. When it ETBs, put a counter on a creature, +1/+1 counter. It's not great, but it's a warrior. Works off the +1/+1 counter sub-theme, so, it's a bread and butter sort of filler piece at the common level for multiple themes within the set. So you'll probably play it here and there because it crosses over between a couple of mechanics. But Expedition Skulker is next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/2 Vampire Rogue that has Death Touch, as long as you control another rogue. So this is kind of, again, interesting. When you build your party decks, you're going to end up playing multiple creatures of the same type. You can't just put like 1 of each type in and hope you get them all out. So this is going to be interesting in those fail cases where you weren't able to get the entire party, but you were able to get 2 rogues. You don't have to feel too bad about it because at least now your guy has Death Touch. So, I don't know, it's a bear. 2 mana, 2/2 with upside. I'll take it most of the time. Plus, it contributes to the party theme. But up next is Taborax, Hope's Demise. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 2/2 legendary demon cleric with flying. It has lifelink as long as it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on Taborax. If that creature was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, you lose 1 life. This would be much, much better if Cat Combo was still in the format, because it would get a token every single turn, much like Corvald gets tokens a lot. And I guess Corvald's still going to be in the format, but this is like a cheaper Corvald that starts with like Windrake stats. It's kind of interesting. And if it ever gets big enough, and you don't have to proc its ability to put counters on it, there's a million ways to put counters on it. If it ever gets big enough, it has lifelink. I mean, it all seems pretty decent, and the starting body for the cost is not so terrible, right? So I kind of like this in the decks that want to sacrifice their own stuff, but those decks just aren't going to be good enough without Cauldron Familiars, so I don't know how much I like it. But let's move on. Hold on real quick. Okay. I'm back. I had to cough. That's what happens when you talk for a really long time without stopping. But we've only got 4 cards left, really only 3 cards left to talk about today. So let's do that. I had to take a swig of drink, sorry. Moving on. Here's Yamara Mystic. This is 3 mana, 1, a blue, and a red for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard with flying. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, Mystic gets +2/+0 till end of turn. So kind of our wee Dragonauts in this set, but in a way this is like better than Wee Dragonauts because it also procs off of Wizards. I think this is really interesting. This fixes the problem that we had last time Wizards were in the format, where Wizards wanted you to play a bunch of instants and sorceries, right? But in the Wizards deck, you also have to have enough Wizards to make it worth playing the Wizard tribal theme in the first place. So, there was always this weird push-pull where I have to have a certain number of Wizards, but also have to have a certain number of instants and sorceries. So they've kind of fixed that problem by making all the Wizards just proc off of instant sorceries and other Wizards. The problem is this time around they just don't look as good. Like this doesn't look anywhere near as good as some of the Wizard stuff we saw last time. It's much easier to proc, so it just gets to be Wee Dragonauts. But hey, some people play Wee Dragonauts, so I can't really bag on it too much. Plus, this guy's riding a Stingray, which is just the dopest thing I've ever seen. So there's that. Moving on, here's Maul of the Skyclaves. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for an equipment. And when it enters the battlefield, you attach it to a creature you control. So again, this is fairly common on equipment in this set. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and first strike. It's very good. I'm not really sure how much play this sees, but a 3 mana aura that gave a creature +2/+2 flying and first strike would seem overpowered. It still wouldn't be very good because it's an aura, but at the same time, it would seem like they're trying to push an aura. Now, this is an equipment, so you don't have to worry about like getting 2 for 1 if the creature dies. Even if you just get like a 1/1 on the table, suddenly you'll end up with a 3/3 flying first strike, which is a good body to have against pretty much everything. So I actually kind of really like this card, but I'm not sure that it's worth the slots in certain decks. Aggro decks, I don't know about this. I think they'd rather play like Anthem effects in the 3-drop slot or just a really overstated creature. So this will have to prove itself. I don't think it's anywhere near the level of a card like Equipment when we're talking about standard, or Embercleave, when we're talking about standard playable equipment. But I do think this is the most pushed equipment we've seen since Embercleave, if that shows you anything. Shadow Spear is a very good card too, don't get me wrong. But this looks like a very good Magic card to me, especially considering that you just attach it to a thing when it ETBs, and that is very good. It mitigates the high equip cost, but at the same time, this being a little bit sweeper proof, and all you have to do is get like a 1/1 out and you can just keep attacking for a lot with evasion, all seems great to me. So I kind of have my eye on this card. I think it might be slightly too expensive, but they've done a lot to decrease the overall cost of playing the card, and this effect for this raid seems actually kind of very good. So I've got my eye on it, but I'm not convinced. Moving on, though, we got to translate this bad boy right here. The land half of it is obviously just comes into play tapped. Tap for a red. But the instant half is kind of actually super interesting to me. This is Spikefield Risks. It's just 1 red mana for an instant that deals damage to any target. If a permanent that was dealt damage this way were to die this turn, you exile it instead. So that might actually, that clause might actually come up a good bit. If you shock an Anax and then finish it off with a Spikefield Risks, and suddenly it doesn't leave behind tokens, that might be important. There's a lot of different plays like that. In the format right now, just a lot of interesting wrinkles like that. But it's also just like a burn spell, it's a 1 mana burn face for one red mana at instant speed. but it also decreases the land count in your burn deck, which is something Burn is really interested in doing. So I kind of really like this. Increases the smoothness that your burn deck plays at. Again, most burn decks are interested in doing that, effectively kind of increasing the land count in a way, while also increasing the amount of burn spells you can play, while also, again, subtly being able to decrease the land count. These are all things that are incredibly important for burn, so even though this only does 1 damage, I can actually see this seeing a fair amount of play, and it looks like a better card than I think a lot of people are evaluating it at first glance. Plus the art is really disturbing, like insanely disturbing art. But let's reload Mythic Spoiler one more good time here and see if we have anything new on the day before we take it home. We do. Oh no. Oh no. Oh man. Oh man. Not again. Okay, so we have a new black flip land here that we have to translate. First time I'm seeing these cards, y'all. This art is insane. This giant mosquito sucking this thing dry. We have Zoff Consumption here. This is 4 and 2 black for sorcery. Each opponent loses 4 life. You gain 4 life. And then Bloody Pond is... Okay, this isn't great. This doesn't affect the board at all, and it costs a whole bunch of mana. So I can tell you straight away that I don't like this. I honestly don't think this is worth it. Maybe it's like a last shot to the opponent that can also function as a land drop, but ultimately I don't like this one. So let's move on to Practiced Tactics. This is just 1 white mana for an instant. Let me come back up. Choose target attacking or blocking creature. Practice Tactics deals that creature an amount of damage equal to twice the number of creatures in your party. Okay. Not great. It has to target an attacking or blocking creature. And then you have to have creatures in your party for it to actually deal any damage. And, if you just have 1 creature in your party, this is on rate because we've seen 1 mana white instants like this that deal like 2 damage. They shock an attacking or blocking creature. We've seen that card a few times. So if you just have 1 guy in your party that does that, but this card is literally useless if you don't have any creatures out. So there's just so much I hate about this. I do not like this card. Let's move on to Coral Helm Chronicler. I like the art, and I like the alliterative name. This is 3 mana for a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast a kicked spell, draw a card, then discard a card. Okay. When Coral Helm Chronicler enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a card with the kicker ability from among them and put it into your hand, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. This card's okay. You basically get card advantage. You get a 3 mana 2/2 that draws a card, as so long as you have a kicker card in the top 5. And this could whiff, and it's going to feel so bad when it whiffs. But, even if you whiff on it, you'll eventually get a kicker spell. And then you'll end up getting some value off of it, some card selection, some filtering. So, I guess it's not terrible. But 3 mana is a pretty big investment for something. But at the same time, it at least has an ETB trigger. But the ETB trigger requires that you play, probably 20-plus things with kicker in your deck. So we'll see how good the kicker deck actually is. Not sold on this, but I really like the idea of enter the battlefield card advantage. I'm a sucker for that, so it might be better than I think. Moving on, here's Roiling Vortex. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. Okay. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. You can pay red to have opponents not be able to gain life this turn. That's interesting. Rather than like Tibble, which just doesn't let them gain life. This is just 1 red mana. They can't gain life this turn, which is actually kind of interesting. It's not worth it for just 2 mana. If that was the only thing the card did, that wouldn't be worth it. But obviously, this is repeatable damage in a burn deck or even an aggro deck, but I don't think it's worth playing in aggro. Not at all. But still, this is repeatable damage that will eventually even finish the game given enough turns. So, it's we saw cards like that, too, in the last... We have Underworld Dreams in this format. It kind of feels like that, 1 damage a turn, but it also deals damage to you, so you got to keep that in mind. And obviously the important ability that probably makes this a sideboard card is whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Vortex deals 5 damage. So if Pact of Negation and all the other pacts are still in this set, then there's that. There's also the... what is it, the party tutor thing I was talking about earlier? If you have a full party for 1 mana, you go search something up that costs 4, you just cast the spell for free. It deals 5 damage to them if they do that. There's actually a ton of stuff you can do with this, isn't there? I wonder if this is really good against, Storm, perhaps. There's stuff you can do with this. It feels like I'm missing something relatively big and standard. But I don't know, cards like Winota just put the stuff directly into play. This doesn't affect Ugin. This doesn't affect Adventures. No, this doesn't really affect Adventures. I'm just trying to think like big things it could affect in the next format. It doesn't affect Euro. So maybe there's something either in this set or the next couple of sets this completely destroys. Or maybe since it's the first time I'm reading the card and I've just now seen it like a minute ago, I haven't really had enough proper time to think about it and come up with what this is supposed to hose in standard. But it might hose something else a little bit later. I do like stuff that hoses free spells. Maybe they can unban Once Upon a Time. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Never do that. But yeah, I guess like having something that helps to kneecap one of the most broken things in Magic, which is free spells. We always tell wizards that free spells are too powerful. They should stop printing them. And this is at least something that hobbles free spells. That's probably good. We wanted that, right? So I guess there's that. But that's all the Zendikar Rising cards from today. We got through it really fast, actually, and I think I said everything I wanted to say about the cards, too. That's a first. Just let me know where I screwed up this video, because there's always one goof like in every spoiler video, so just let me know where it is. And also let me know where we can expand on anything I didn't get to mention when talking about these cards. If you've got a take or an interaction I didn't come up with, let us know down there in the comments section as always. And of course, you can check out the Patreon $1 a month to vote on content, including upcoming deck techs. And you'll be notified when I stream on Twitch. Of course, you can go to Twitch, twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, and follow me there, watch me play Magic. Probably won't be twitching too much until we get the AC fixed, but that'll happen soon. Until then, I'll be doing spoilers every day still. Not going to miss any of these. I promise. It's kind of my duty to do these, and it's my favorite time of the year anyway. So don't worry, you guys, you'll have me every day, no matter how hot my house gets. But I think I'm done for now, and I need to go ahead and wrap this up because it is getting long, and my computer actually is not plugged in, so it might die any second. So let's go ahead and get out of here. I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.